I wasn't born yesterday. It was a new day and all my troubles seemed so far away. You'll have to wait till yesterday is here, but who wants yesterday's papers? Welcome to Season 5 of Vaguely Scientific. I am Derek, and I'll tell you what, I'm starting to see some structural weaknesses in the Moon Laboratory's defense grid that we could probably take advantage of. Jim? Where'd you go? Oh, right, he went back to the Wild West to find our guest for this week. Hold on one second. Jim, can you hear me?
Yeehaw!
Hi, Jim. Did you find someone to be our guest this week?
I did. I found Joel.
Oh, good. We lost him a while back. Hi, Joel.
Howdy, y'all.
Welcome back.
Welcome back to the show where we answer the most ridiculous audience-submitted questions in a manner that we like to call vaguely scientific. But before we do that, Jim, do we have time for the fun science fact of the day?
We do. This one, actually, I'm surprised that we haven't done this one because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. The Atacama Desert in Chile is the driest non-polar desert in the world. In fact, it is the only desert that actually receives less precipitation than the polar deserts, which I think is pretty cool.
Oh, that's in Chile, so that's South America.
Yeah, the Atacama Desert's extremely dry. Like, there are some weather stations that have never seen rain. And granted, these weather stations are only like 60 to 80 years old, but that's a long time to never see any rain.
That's pretty much what we've been dealing with this summer.
Not here. It rained a lot 2 days ago, and it's still wet out there, and I need to mow the lawn, which is not good. Too soggy.
We're out by Cleveland, and we've had some rain this last week in particular, but it's been kind of a drier summer.
It's been a very hot summer, and I don't like it.
Yeah. Actually, I feel like it hasn't even been hot. It's just been muggy.
It's been like a swamp.
Yeah, which is worse, I think.
Fair. Well, let's quit bringing everyone down, mainly me, and talk about our first question for the week.
Let's do.
Question 1 this week comes to us from Nate. When the apocalypse is all over, assuming humans survive, what will human society turn into or look like?
Well, I think it might depend on how thorough this apocalypse is.
Yeah, this is what I found fascinating about this question was I think it depends on what the apocalypse ends up being.
Right?
Yeah, that's true too.
If you're looking at a zombie apocalypse, if you're looking at a nuclear apocalypse, if you're looking at some kind of plague apocalypse, like there are a variety of different apocalyptic scenarios that we could play out.
Apocalypses, yeah. Yeah, this question is so broad that I didn't really go in too much depth with any particular avenue I sought to explore it in, because it all very much depends on how does the world end.
Yeah.
Not with a bang, but with a whimper.
Right?
I think a big part of it is how many people actually survive, because I have never seen The Road, or I've never read The Road either, but I always think of like, there's this, one random guy just walking around with his kid. It's like, well, you don't really restart civilization with a random guy and his kid. That's just, they live till they don't. And that's one way that it could go down. But like, if there are enough people, I would imagine they would start some kind of settlements again and, kind of get things regoing.
We want to re-go the things. Oh, well, I wanted to throw something in here before we get too far into this, because I thought this was an interesting thing to bring up, but it's not entirely in the spirit of the question. And that is that, defining what the apocalypse is. Of course, I'm sure that Nate, who submitted the question, means the end of the world. But the word apocalypse originally comes from Greek and means a revelation of some kind. It literally comes from a Greek word that means to take the lid off of a pot. And to reveal something. And so the one point I wanted to make about this is that a lot of times in different religious texts and stuff, an apocalypse isn't so much an end of a world, but it is a revelation of some prior unknown truth. And that kind of answers the question in such a way that, like, as we discover more, as we have scientific breakthroughs and develop new technologies and stuff, humanity tends to survive, and it does kind of drastically change our society.
That's true. I mean, if you look at the changes that we've seen just in the last 100 years with, well, I guess a little longer than 100 years now, but, the invention of the airplane and the invention of the nuclear bomb and the invention of space travel and the invention of the internet. It's like one thing after another,
Yeah, that's what really fascinates me about the apocalypse genre, so to speak. Whether it is zombies or whether it's nuclear, whatever your choice of poison may be, it really is that opportunity to examine society and what it is that we value most and how we preserve those things when everything that we know has been taken away in some ways. Like, the thing I keep coming back to is, when you watch The Walking Dead, it's not really about the zombies,
right?
It's about the characters of the people who are still alive in the midst of all of this, and what does it mean to carry on humanity, and what are the things that you choose to bring back, and how do you go about doing that? One of my favorite books is The Stand by Stephen King, and how it explores that concept, but also puts it into a much more epic scale of the good versus evil traditional story.
Well, the best, or I guess the most popular, or the most famous zombie stories in particular, since we're on this subject, I can think of off the top of my head, The Walking Dead was a good example you already brought up, but Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead were both really, how the zombies happen is secondary and really not super well explored in those movies, because it's not the point. Like, the point is, how do people interact with each other? And then there are tons of metaphors for, like, racism, and then Dawn of the Dead famously for consumerism.
Yeah, one of my favorites, and it's a shame that it's hard to find. You can't. I don't think there's anything streaming it right now. But the original Dawn of the Dead that was filmed in
Monroeville,
the West Monroeville. Yeah, thank you. The original Dawn of the Dead that was filmed in Monroeville. This is a several decade old movie, so spoiler alert. But at the end, as the defenses are slowly being cracked open and the zombies are invading the mall, the roving bike gangs and different groups that come in with that the anarchy that just takes over at the end and creates such a similar twist to the original Night of the Living Dead. That's one of those, just a sliver of that fascinating aspect of there are going to be those roving biker gangs and or different aspects. There will be groups that turn to cannibalism. There will be groups that turn to forming their own complete cultures. The artist colony in The Walking Dead in the television show. How they have their own form of language. Why use many words when few words work better?
How were they alive? Can I ask you that? Just how were they alive?
Very carefully and with great finesse.
Well, it's so you kind of get into like other post-apocalyptic fiction like Mad Max or Fallout. And that kind of brings up if some devastating thing were to happen to wipe out a lot of the planet, you're losing probably government and money and like things that are in place to be more civilized, I guess.
Right.
A lot of these stories kind of depict returning to a very much survival of the fittest, kind of like might equals right scenario.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I was looking at was sort of like what do societies look like in a way? Because like when you said Fallout, it made me think of like the vaults, but
right.
Weirdly enough, I started watching. I don't know if either of you ever saw the anime Trigun. It was, I think, maybe about 20, 25-ish years old now. Now, this isn't an apocalypse per se, but they went to colonize a planet, and they got basically stranded on this desert planet with no resources. And what happens is that there are loads and loads of outlaws. There are tons and tons of vigilantes and things like that. But, you know, a lot of the common folk just sort of settle down and build their cities, and they try to do the best they can. And I think that's a scenario that seems plausible as well, is that some people, they just kind of want to, you know, get by, and it's easier to get by if you have numbers. So I think some people would form settlements and societies and things like that. But then, like you were saying, like both of you were saying, there'd be roving bands of outlaws going around and doing their thing. And, you know, that's something we see in a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction, I guess. So
Trigun, if I'm not mistaken, it's like inspired by Wild West kind of world.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because like a lot of the history we have about the in early American history, or the, you know, the Wild West era, a lot of it was the lawless West.
Right.
Is the idea we have about it.
The interesting thing is, in a way, you see a similar kind of situation occurring during the Dust Bowl. It's not nearly as extreme because there were, as a country, you know, the country didn't end, the world didn't end, but like for the farmers and the people affected by the Dust Bowl back in the 1930s, I mean, they had to just pick up and leave, and you know, they were basically starving to death. And if it wasn't for sort of the externalities of there being a United States around them, it would have been a lot worse than it actually was. So that's something to think about as well, I think.
One of the things that Jim, I think you said earlier, was that, you know, a lot of the government and the structures would be kind of broken down. So that raises the question too of, you know, depending on your apocalypse, you know, how much forewarning was there, and at what point, like, if the nuclear weapons have all been launched, has the president and have the other, you know, government, some of the top government officials been whisked away to their own bunker? And
right.
then,
Yeah.
You know, I could see an interesting story, and I don't know if something like this has been put together, so I'm going to copyright this real quick, but
Trademark.
Yeah, trademark. You know, there are all these people that are just trying to restore some semblance of normalcy in society. There are all these other groups, but then there's also this area where all the elite have been gathered, and they're still living very comfortably. Like, exploring that would be, I think, actually, I was just thinking, one of the Romero films does this to some extent, because there's a whole bunch of like rich people that have secured themselves in a skyscraper or something. I can't remember which one that was.
Huh. I haven't seen most of them.
Was far down the line.
The last one I saw, I think, was Day of the Dead, and I just remember there was a zombie gas station attendant who led all the zombies into the city.
I don't know why, but the thing that sort of popped into my head in a way was was Final Fantasy VII, where you have is it Midgar? Is the big plate city?
The big yeah.
You have Midgar, and then like underneath that giant plate is just slums, just box houses and like sheet metal houses, and so that kind of reminded me of that, I suppose. But
I mean, it's a very common allegory for the class system, you know.
Yeah.
I just keep thinking of, there's rumors that there are bunkers in the Ozarks set aside for like the elite of the country, and this kind of fits in with Illuminati theories. But I could see that being an interesting science fiction story. That
What was the other one that really reminded me of? I don't know enough about this actually to really say, but Battle Angel Alita. There are
Oh,
like these giant floating cities that are very tenuously connected to the surface, and then down below is just slums again.
yep. Like they're all left on the scorched earth, kind of.
Yeah, basically. But yeah, the other thing that I was thinking a lot about was whether or not, like, what kind of apocalypse again?
Yeah.
Like, because are you going to have plants? Is the really big
Ooh.
one. If you cannot cultivate plants, then there's really not a whole lot else you can do.
Yeah, because that kills the soil and.
In a nuclear apocalypse, you're also looking at the fact that a lot of the things that you see survival situations bringing up, as far as going on supply runs and finding all those cases of Twinkies that somehow survived, things like that.
Yeah,
all of that food is now irradiated,
right.
Right.
And Fallout kind of handles it comically a little bit, but I think handles it well too. In that everybody in this new post-apocalyptic world is just living with some level of radiation sickness at all times.
One of the biggest challenges in the Fallout series, which is a video game franchise about post-apocalyptia, for anyone who doesn't know, I don't know what our listeners do, but one of the biggest themes that runs throughout the entire series is the search for purified water. And that's and that's also in the Mad Max universe as well. Is like, if you have water, that's like the first thing you need.
Mm-hmm.
I think the water purification is like a huge story point in Fallout 3, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
it's the big crux of your story. The whole part of this question that kind of tripped me up a lot of the routes I was going down was just that one phrase, assuming humans survive. Because I was thinking about the dinosaurs, and Jim, I know you know more about this than I do, but like dinosaurs at some point stopped being on the planet, stopped being alive.
I mean, they're still here.
Well,
just dead.
I'm oversimplifying a lot.
Their bodies are still here.
There's also descendants of them, and they're
fair, yeah.
But the point being that we know at some point a lot of life on Earth was wiped out.
Yeah.
I blame raptor motorcycle gangs.
Yeah, I mean, raptors are real quick. You got to keep your head on a swivel there.
Well, so what I'm kind of getting at, I guess, is if we view that as like the biggest, most powerful creatures on Earth were all wiped out, it took humanity a very long time to reach what it is now. And so I'm just kind of like omitting the assuming humans survive. Like, what if something similar happens and we all get wiped out?
Right.
But the planet could like repair itself, and then hundreds of thousands of years in the future, there's like a new species on Earth.
I was watching a really interesting documentary that I don't know how widely considered this is. But it was basically like looking at this one specific species of dinosaur that was a raptor, in fact, I believe. And they were saying that towards the end of the Cretaceous, this dinosaur was starting to evolve traits that were more similar to like an intelligent creature, like a human or like a great ape. Because one of the things that they look for is sort of the brain shape and brain structure. And they were saying that the parts of the brain that are very prominent in humans were starting to become very prominent in this dinosaur. And if it had like another 3, 5, 10 million years, what would it have turned into? Who knows? They got hit by an asteroid. We'll never know. But it was an interesting concept, and I thought it was kind of fun.
So the show Dinosaurs could have actually been a documentary.
Yeah.
Well, are you familiar with how that show ends?
I think so.
Yeah. It ends with them all watching the asteroid like plummeting toward the Earth. Yeah,
that's what I thought.
It's the biggest downer ending ever.
It's massive. Yeah.
Man, it's rough to be the one, the like in all the chunk of time dinosaurs roamed the Earth, to be the one born, right then.
Yeah.
To have to be alive during that time frame.
Well, don't count your chickens yet, Jim, because we might be there.
That's fair. The one last thing I want to mention is that sort of piggybacking off the dinosaurs, if you look back in time, there have been 5 big mass extinctions, and each one of them has been a little bit different. So that's another thing. Like if we got hit by a meteor that's not too big that would like wipe out all of the humans, a meteor that was big enough to end a civilization, for example, but not big enough to kill every single human, then it would be like having a nuclear war, but without the radiation. So if you can get by for a while until sort of I guess you'd call it nuclear winter, the fallout in the sky, the ash cloud subsides and plants can grow again, then you might be in good shape. Like obviously society would be starting back from zero, but I mean, that's a little better. It's better than nuclear war for sure.
So if the rich people who are in the bunker are joined by like scientists and engineers, then maybe they could rebuild society.
There is that seed vault in Svalbard. I think that's how you say the name of that place. Svalbard. I don't know. And they have like seeds from most plants on Earth, especially like crops. So as long as that place isn't the one that gets hit by the meteor or the nuke or the whatever, we're good, because that's where all the plants are going to come from.
We put all of
at the very least, the people of Svalbard will be fine.
Yeah.
It's
very cold there. I don't think they have a growing season.
Humanity all collaborates and puts together, just in case we're all wiped out, here's the civilization starter pack. Yeah. And then that's where the meteor hits.
Yeah, exactly. There was another mass extinction, and this is my favorite one. It's the end Permian mass extinction that was caused by the Siberian trap eruptions. And now this was a very long on human terms, but it's a very short geologically. This disaster took a few 100,000 years to sort of cause a mass extinction. But basically, all of Siberia was volcanoes, and they were all erupting at once. And it released enough carbon dioxide into the oceans that it turned the oceans very anoxic. So there's not enough oxygen for the fish, so they all died off. Atmosphere chemistry changed. A lot of land stuff died off. That was actually the worst mass extinction. It killed like 90-ish% of all life on Earth. It's like 96% of all ocean life and like between 70 and 90% of land life. So that's an interesting edge case, though, because, again, it took a long time for that to actually, do irreparable damage to the environment. So if we had something like that where we could say, oh, the Siberian traps are erupting again, we should probably do something. Stockpile for the next 100,000 years. I don't know.
Well, those are the dangers of seltzer water, Jim.
Yeah. It really is.
I do want to take a second and just appreciate that you have a favorite mass extinction event.
It's great. That's what made me laugh.
Nobody ever appreciates that. I think it's important to have a favorite.
Oh, man, I can't even settle on a favorite animal, so I don't know.
Either way, there's going to be a whole lot of preppers that fare fairly well. At least the ones that take it like super seriously.
They have a lot of contingency plans, I think. Mm-hmm. That's what we're exploring. Well, listeners, let us know, what are your contingency plans for our impending doom?
Ooh, yeah. In the meantime, I have an intermission segment for you all.
Yay.
One of my favorites. This is another installment of Oopsie Daisy.
Oopsie Daisy.
I recently learned about this, and I thought it was hilarious because having taken organic chemistry, the first thing you want to do is clean your glassware when you're done with something. But let's start at the beginning. So Soviet scientists were experimenting with water. They were specifically looking at its properties when it was being forced through quartz tubes. So after their experiments, the water seemed to have changed into a thick goo that had a much higher boiling point and a much lower freezing point. And this was dubbed polywater, as they thought it was a polymer of water. Polymers are when you sort of connect individual molecules together into long chains. So water would be H2O, but a polymer of water could be like, a bunch of H2Os chained together. So Other scientists in the Soviet Union started to try to repeat the experiment. They studied this polywater, and then eventually scientists in the West started to take notice because they didn't want to get left behind. Now, the thing is, scientists were concerned about this polywater for a lot of reasons. What could you do with it? Was it dangerous? Could it be turned into a weapon of mass destruction? If you dropped it into regular water, would all of the water turn into polywater and basically end all life on Earth, kind of like in Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut? So there was a lot of stuff people were unclear about. So scientists all over the world started to try to replicate these experiments, and they were getting a lot of really inconsistent results. And they noticed that when they did get polywater, it was mostly sodium and chlorine in it. So one of the things that I thought was very funny is a scientist named Denis Rousseau. He experimented with his own sweat and got the same results as this polywater. Ooh. So people got more skeptical. Scientists across the world started trying to laser focus on what was really going on here. Stricter controls, cleaner equipment. And after these improvements, they realized that what they thought was polywater was actually caused by impurities from contaminated lab equipment. So they should have washed their dishes.
And it's just because they didn't clean their stuff.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. When you're in organic chemistry, that's like the first thing you learn is how to clean your dishes.
How long did this take?
This was like a 10 or 15 year affair. Like this was through the 70s and it was weird because a lot of scientists didn't take it very seriously, but they were also like, well, if the Soviets are researching it, then I guess we better do that too.
Oh, right.
So do you think that after that polywater situation, like they made a poster to put in the Russian labs that was kind of like that? What was it? Don't be like Carol, and she's wearing the dark glasses because she didn't wear her goggles.
Yeah. Oh.
Clean your glassware.
Clean your glassware, people.
Well, question 2 this week, I think has about as many avenues of exploration as question 1. So why don't we jump into that?
Why don't we?
Perhaps we already have.
Perhaps we already have, and we don't. That's very good, Joel. That's very good. Question 2 this week comes to us from Jonathan. Which time travel theory is what will actually happen? Traveling to the past is actually jumping into parallel universes, or it's all one timeline and it'll sort itself out and write the timeline, quote unquote. Or is there some other option? And as a tangent, Jonathan includes, how does this affect choice, predetermined fate philosophy? For example, do we never see a world-ending apocalypse because it's always time traveled to fix it, so we never have memory of it? Or have we just never done that? The inherent problem with the end of that is that if we had never done it, we wouldn't really know, right?
Doctor Who!
This is a...
we all know that time is just a wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey ball of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I apologize to the listeners. This was a rather long question, and I kind of read it as quickly as I could. Hope it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the distillation of the question is just like, how would time travel actually work? What seems to be the most plausible reality of it, if it could be real?
Time travel, how do?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think, I mean, I've talked about this on the show before. I feel like the most plausible version of time travel would be that time travelers are part of events as they go. So, like, for example, if I were to travel back to, I don't know, like 1930 right now, yeah. I had already been in 1930 a long time ago. Like, that happened in the 30s. I was walking around doing whatever. So that is not a thing that changes just because I am now in the present going back in time.
So let me jump right in there because I knew you were going to bring that up. Mm-hmm. Because that tangent and the end of this question, how does this affect choice or free will, essentially? Mm-hmm. If that is the case and everything that's going to happen already is going to happen, that right there is kind of, there is no free will.
I don't necessarily agree with that.
It's a very... nebulous.
I can choose to go back to 1930, and if I choose, so let me start over. So, in my explanation, what I mean is that like we have free will, but a personal timeline is separate from the actual universe's timeline. Like your personal timeline, you might jump around if you're a time traveler, but the universe's timeline is like one big string. You know what I mean?
So there was another option brought up in Endgame. I think it was in Endgame, where the Hulk explains, and my quote unquote favorite part of the movie is how he just knows this. All the time travel movies you've ever seen are wrong, and if you travel into the past, you're just your own timeline. So you can't actually go back in time to change the past. You can just go into your own future, which is in the past. And he explains it about as well as that.
I thought that the explanation in that movie was that if you go into a different timeline, it's just a different universe.
I mean, I think that inherently is what they were saying.
Okay.
I just remember they have like a very convoluted explanation, which I think was supposed to be funny.
It's been a while since I've watched it, and I remember that when he tries to explain it to the Ancient One, she just kind of like laughs at him and goes, "Okay." It was a great moment in the film. But yeah, I think most plausible is probably somewhere along that multiverse, that theory of multiple universes. I know that that's something that is still being explored in studies of string theory right now. Mm-hmm. And I think that if there's one that is truly plausible at all, that would be the most likely one, because that idea of every decision that a person makes splinters off into several different timelines of what if I turned left instead of turning right, and what if I had the chicken instead of the pork, and things like that. So that one seems to make the most sense and create the fewest paradoxes for me, though it's not always the most fun.
I think the inherent problem with time travel fiction is that there's always some plot hole that we can't figure out, and that probably is the best in terms of science fiction. That's the best way around that, is there are alternate universes, so you don't necessarily change one particular timeline by going into a different one. The struggle I have with that, and I, again, not an expert in string theory or anything like that. The struggle I guess I have with that idea is it almost seems like we're starting with the assumption that in some capacity time travel is possible and trying to figure out how could we explain it when I just kind of think probably time travel isn't possible. And I believe
that's sort of where we are with our current laws of physics, is that it seems unlikely that it could be possible, but it's also like there are mathematical equations that allow for it.
Okay.
But whether or not it is possible because like there are also mathematical equations for white holes, but we don't see those anywhere. And the other thing is, just because it's possible for like a subatomic particle doesn't mean we can do it.
Fair point.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the things we're discovering and figuring out in quantum physics just break our brains anyway.
Yeah.
So theoretical physics is theoretical for a reason. Again, not an expert in any of these things, but like I know there are mathematical equations where you can kind of calculate things that aren't physically possible, but like mathematically they are. And so that's kind of where a lot of theoretical physicists go, is like, if this thing exists, then this is how it could work.
I think you have to start with the assumption that we're or at least you have to start with the suspension of disbelief, and go on the hypothesis that time travel is plausible, possible, because otherwise there's no conversation to be had, I guess. But
the phrasing of this question, which time travel theory is what will actually happen? I just think it's worth mentioning that one possible answer is that time travel doesn't actually happen, and that's the answer.
Right.
I don't know. I know that Jim has said many times the idea that if you're going to go back, like the timeline idea, if you are ever going to go back in time, you will have already done that. That makes about as much sense to me as going into alternate timelines, as it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't understand any of it. So like, if you told me that's how it worked, I'd be like, okay, yeah.
It's really hard in any scenario that we've come up with in our fiction so far to determine a method and a set of laws for time travel that does not create unsolvable paradoxes.
Absolutely.
But just in case we do discover time travel, should we leave a moment here in the podcast for one of us for future us to jump onto the Discord and interrupt the podcast at this point?
Right. Yeah, we'll just everybody be quiet for 1 second.
Hi, this is Future Jim. Since you recorded this episode, the Queen has actually passed away, the Queen of England. So that's something interesting that you now know from the future.
Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's one other example that I really like, and it's very fresh in my brain because I just finished watching the series again, like over the last week and some. I've mentioned this before. My favorite show, my favorite like anything, is this anime called Martian Successor Nadesco. And I'm going to spoil a big plot point as long as y'all don't mind.
I do not
spoil
mind.
away.
All right. So, and audience, I'm going to spoil a big plot point. So if you don't mind, then just listen on. And I love this example because there's just no paradox to it. It's really neat. And I think that's cool. So in the show, there's this character named Miss Versange, Inez Versange, and she's the scientist lady. She has no memory of her childhood. They found her wandering in the desert when she was 8 years old, and they rescued her. And as the series progresses, it's actually at the very end of the series you find this out. So Miss Versange was accidentally sent back in time as a child, and ended up being found in the desert, 20 years before the series started and being raised. She met the main character as a child 2 years prior before being blasted back in time and losing her memory, and then grew up and lived her life, and now they're about the same age. It's just kind of I think that's so cool because there's not a paradox to it. It's just a thing that happened to both of them, and they didn't realize it because, again, they sort of have their own personal timeline that is separate from the universe's grand timeline. And I think that's just a super cool example.
It's kind of like the Weeping Angels.
I was thinking that.
Yeah, weirdly enough, the Weeping Angels do a similar kind of thing, and it almost kind of works, except sometimes it doesn't because it depends on who's the writer.
Because Doctor Who.
Yeah.
That's one of my biggest complaints about the Angels is how complicated they've become.
Yeah.
So I want to come back to, is there some other option that we haven't explored? And there's one that I can think of. I'm sure there are.
Back to the Future.
Back to the Future is alternate realities.
Oh, I thought that was like if you go back and change something, then it just changes.
Well, there is an explanation. Okay, this is a tangent. There's an explanation in Back to the Future.
Back to the Future 2. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Where Dr. Brown is saying you've gone back in time and created a separate timeline, and so you have to go back to the point where it branched off, and that's the only possible way to get back. But Marty McFly never actually gets back to his original timeline in that franchise.
Oh, I see. That's
he always has changed his timeline to a version that is more beneficial to him by the end of the story.
And that kind of actually, I can tangent back onto my original timeline here. I was kind of going to say the Futurama idea of you can travel forward in time, but you can never travel backward in time, but also that the timeline is cyclical. So if you go all the way through the dawn of humanity, you can eventually catch up to where you left. And the reason that I bring that up specifically is this idea that I've had in my head that if we were ever able to travel forwards or backwards in time. This is assuming the timeline is not set. I think it would be interesting to suggest that if you were to travel forwards in time, you could never go to a timeline in which you continued to be in that timeline. So like you would always go to a future where you learn that, oh, you disappeared at that exact moment that you left the present. And that's kind of how I think about Back to the Future and the Futurama idea.
Yeah. I just love that episode because there's the part where he rolls down the window and he tries to shoot Hitler and he's like, oh, I hit Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh no. Yeah, that one seems to track pretty well for me too, because thinking about it from the standpoint of how would you accomplish time travel in the first place, I've always at least imagined that somewhere it has to do with it has to be similar to breaking the light speed barrier, because that's kind of the idea that makes time travel, at least if I recall. It's been a while since I've brushed up on Einstein, but Einstein suggested that as you approach closer to the speed of light, that time slows down, that our experience of time at least slows down. So I think that's got to be, at least scientifically, as close as we get to approaching the mechanism of it. And so that would track with only being able to travel forward in time, because if you're traveling faster than the speed of light and time is slowing down, then you're going to be moving in the direction. You're going to still be moving forward in time.
So like rate of travel approaches infinity, but never actually.
Yeah, because I guess the going theory is that if you can go faster than light, then you can go back in time, but nothing can go faster than light. So, but the faster you go, the slower time moves for you, and then you can not time travel, but like the rest of the universe would be going by faster than you are. So you could theoretically go to the future because the rest of the world around you is moving way faster than you are in time.
Whenever we talk about relativity, I have to work really hard to stay in the conversation. Like I believe this makes sense. I have nothing to contribute to it. You're right, Jim.
That's why I don't want to time travel, because it's too complicated.
They just need a handy brochure that gives you all the instructions. That's what we really need.
Make sure you don't step on a butterfly when you go back to the Cretaceous.
Yeah. I hear they frown on that.
Actually, so that's one thing I really liked about Loki, the series, was they were like policing time, and they were like, oh, well, we don't have to look at these areas because they're areas where a really bad catastrophe happened. And that's where the bad guy was hiding, because they figure, oh, there's such a bad catastrophe here, it wipes out all life. So nothing bad's happening, in the moments leading up to that. And I just think that's interesting. Like, if you step on a butterfly 15 minutes before the dinosaurs are hit by a meteor, does it change anything? Could it change anything? Should it change anything?
Ooh.
Well, I recall, I think it was Ray Bradbury that actually wrote a short story where there's a time travel agency, like they do touristy things, and you're able to go back in time to see various things, but you have to stay on a particular path. Like the tourist company has put together, has discovered the path that you need to stay on so that you don't affect anything on the timeline. And the main character steps on a butterfly, and it completely changes the present that he returns to. I need to look up what that story is.
I think I've heard of this.
Time Cop with Jean-Claude Van Damme?
No, it's not. It's definitely not that. It is for sure 100% not that.
It is it's Ray Bradbury's story, A Sound of Thunder, from 1952.
Oh,
okay.
And it is credited with coining the term the butterfly effect.
Oh, that I didn't know. That is interesting.
Which was a fantastic movie, but only if you watch the director's cut.
There is a Treehouse of Horror episode of The Simpsons where Homer fixes his toaster and it accidentally turns it into a time machine. And he keeps, whenever he puts toast in, it sends him back to the dinosaur time. And he's there as long as it takes the toast to cook. And he goes back in time and he keeps accidentally killing. First thing he does is he kills an insect, and then he comes back and the timeline's all messed up. And I think Ned Flanders is like the ruler of the world or something. And there is ultimately he keeps going back in time and trying not to do anything. And I just remember there is the scene where he goes back in time and he's frustrated at this point. He just goes back in time with a baseball bat and just like breaks everything he can. And
Yeah.
That's it. I just like The Simpsons.
It's very good.
Does anybody have anything else to say about time travel?
Don't do it. It's expensive and hard, and it's just going to make a mess.
Well, I was I don't know if we have sufficiently addressed the free will question. I don't know if there's more that we want to look at on that, but like if time travel is possible, if we're talking about these things, is there some time agency that is working to prevent these apocalypses from happening, so we don't have to worry about the answer to question number 1?
Right. Well, that's sort of my question. If all of time is predetermined and such, or the Doctor Who thing, there are fixed points in time that must happen. I don't understand the point of a time agency in that sense, because can they actually prevent the real end of the world when it's quote unquote meant to end?
I mean, I feel like a time agency would be so like bogged down with trying to figure out like, well, maybe not, but I'm thinking like there would be a lot of like, oh, if we do this, will it do that? Like they'd have to run simulations and be like, if we do this one thing, will it cause a worse catastrophe later on down the road or something like that? It's a weird. I wouldn't want to work for the time agency because that would be a stressful job.
Yeah, and thinking about it right now, I think at least as far as media that come to mind, the only time agency that really has a lot of that makes a lot of sense right now is the one from Loki, because they're trying to keep the primary timeline safe, and so by making sure that they have eliminated variants, they're protecting the purity of the primary timeline and not letting all these splinter timelines happen.
Right.
But I'm thinking of different, like there are a couple of different sort of time agencies in Doctor Who. I mean, the Time Lords themselves were supposed to be the protectors and the ones that kept the order of time. It's as far as classic Doctor Who went. Once you get into 2004 and further, the rationale for Time Lords becomes a little fuzzier.
Yeah.
The only other one that I can think of that comes to mind right now is Star Trek, because there is a temporal version of Starfleet that the crew of the Enterprise run into in a few different iterations of the series, and I always appreciate how Star Trek really plays with causality and wrestles with that question of, did this happen because we went back in time, or things like that. Of all the different properties that have wrestled with this, I think Star Trek at least has the most fun with it and tackles it in the most thought-provoking way. But
yeah.
There's a movie that came out fairly recently. It's on Netflix. Ryan Reynolds is in it. I don't remember what it's called right now. The Atom Project.
Yeah.
And I watched it, and it's not bad for like a sci-fi action movie, but they have this kind of, I was going to say this jokingly, and then I remembered, wait, that's the plot to this movie. The very creation of time travel is the cause of the danger in this movie. So like everybody has time travel and they're trying to go back in time, and like none of this would have happened. There's like people trying to kill each other and there's like a war. I won't spoil plot points, but the point is they're trying to go back in time to figure out when time travel was first created, and it's like none of this would have happened if you just didn't create time travel. Which is kind of the exploration of, or what the movie is trying to explore. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil any more than that, I guess, because it's kind of a newer movie.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to mention, because we're talking specifically about free will here, and this isn't a time travel movie, but it is a sci-fi movie, Minority Report.
Oh, yeah.
They don't actually travel through time, but they look into the future. They have like precognition and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And the whole exploration of morality in that is we know that this person is going to commit a murder, but they haven't actually committed a murder. So we're going to go either execute them or arrest them. I don't remember the movie super well. But it ultimately gets to a point where there is somebody is, I guess, framed for a future crime, and they're saying, well, no, we saw that you're definitely going to do it. And they are like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna commit that crime. So that's kind of an exploration into predetermination fate philosophy is the
and
word we
if
have.
I remember right, it was the bad guy ended up, like, part of the process was he ended up manipulating the event so that the precog vision was just vague enough, or just I forget, but like there was some kind of manipulation of how the precogs saw what was going to happen, so that what happened was what they saw, but not actually what was, like what happened in reality or something. It was weird.
If I recall, and I haven't seen this movie in probably 20 years, but it was like he staged a crime that looked exactly the same as the crime he intended to commit. And so when that crime started to unfold, they caught that person, and then he went on and did that crime the same exact, like he wore the cloak and he like did it in the exact same location, something like that. I can't remember exactly.
But so there was some playing with time, at least. It wasn't time travel.
Right.
But it kind of leads into since we were talking about choice.
Right. He played the system.
It goes back into that question of causality.
Right.
And I think that's really one of the more fascinating things about time travel, because of the paradoxes and the causality questions and things like that. That really gets my gears turning in my brain.
That's when you run into the issue of like everything that's going to happen is going to happen, but as soon as you know what's going to happen, do you have the choice to change it? And were you always going to change it? In which case, how can you possibly know? And so too much information. I don't see. That's why I think we just can't figure out time travel, because like knowing how time travel works makes it so it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Turns off. As soon as someone figures it out.
That's how Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy ends. As soon as as if there is a universe where both the question and the answer are known, that universe cancel each other out.
Yeah.
So it all comes back to Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
As it should.
As it should.
As it should.
Well, listeners, there is a lot in both of our questions today that we didn't explore because we ran out of time. So if you have thoughts, we'd love to hear them. In the meantime, speaking of thoughts from our listeners, Jim, do we have any listener mail?
We do. And as always, if you want to send us listener mail, you can email us at feedback@vaguelyscientific.com. You can comment on our blog. You can like us on Facebook. You can tweet at vaguelysci. And this email comes to us in regards to episode 102, Batachlorians, and comes to us from Captain Batman.
Ooh.
Very powerful sounding. So Captain Batman writes, I'm glad you've brought up Adam West's Batman. Dude could solve any problem. He's literally the most powerful Batman.
He is my favorite Batman.
He's Deus Ex Machina.
I don't know what constitutes a powerful Batman, but he could solve any problem.
Well, the world's greatest detective, so powerful in that sense. His brain power, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. He could certainly punch a guy and it would make a big punch. like on screen.
Any Batman who should be able to take on Darkseid, that's Adam West Batman.
That's true.
The solution would just natively be in his utility belt. I mean, that's...
Yeah.
That was the great thing about Adam West Batman.
Yeah. There'd be like anti-Darkseid repellent spray in his utility belt, and it would just work.
Let me tell you, there is an episode of the 66 Batman show where Batman has to bring one of the cohorts of the villain to the Batcave to suss out whether or not they are lying to him about the whereabouts of the bad guy. I think it might have been Bookworm in that episode. But anyway, the way Batman finds out if they're lying is he has them exhale into a paper bag, and then he dumps the air that they exhaled into some test tubes, and he adds truth serum to it, and he says if they were lying, this will turn this color. It's the greatest thing ever, and I watched it and I was like, Jim would be so mad.
Well, here's the thing. Because it's Adam West, I believe it.
The lie is contained in their breath as they exhale. I love that.
I thought this was going to end up being a kind of like, that little trick you can tell to a toddler, like, oh, if you lie, then your forehead light turns red or something, and then they'll put their hand over their forehead when they lie.
If you pee in the pool, the water changes colors.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be the end of that story, where he just tricked them into thinking he had a computer that could do that, and they just like blurted out the truth right before he did it.
He didn't need to trick them.
That's totally Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah,
that's true.
That would be like a more grounded Batman and like a tactic he would use. But no, in Adam West's Batman just actually has the computer that can do that.
Thank you very much for that email. And if you have a question that needs to be answered in a vaguely scientific manner, you can email us at questions@vaguelyscientific.com. If you want to get our episodes the minute that they're released, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and all the other great places that cool podcasts like to hang out. And subscribing and leaving feedback really helps us out, and so does telling your friends.
Tell all your friends so that they listen.
Yeah. Listening is an important part of this complete breakfast.
I don't know if I believe you.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Our vaguely musical intro is composed by Anthony Pizzelli, and don't forget to check out our merch store over at vaguelyscientific.threadless.com. You can get our designs on anything from a t-shirt to a mug to a skateboard. Woo! And, it's just great. There's puzzles and features and I don't know. Just do the end part now.
Okay. Well, thank you to Joel for being our guest this week.
It's been a pleasure. I'll ride off now into the wibbly wobbly timey wimey atomic sunset.
Hooray! That sounds like it might be radioactive. So, for Vaguely Scientific, I am Derek.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Joel.
And that's it for today. You can all go on to the next episode now.
Yay! Toodaloo, everyone.
I've lost the plot. I don't know. Some of what I said might have been useful. We'll see.
I think so.